This is Musical Talk.
Musical Talk.
The UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Musical Talk. The UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, musical talkers. Greetings from London's West End, the shining jewel in an otherwise drab and dismal town. Today we are taking you back off West End, and we will be chatting with Mr. James Hume. James has had a great career in London thus far. He recently worked with Mr. Luke Fredericks as assistant director on Bat Boy, the musical at Southwark Playhouse, as well as the critically acclaimed production of Carousel at the Arcola. Listeners could have seen James on stage as well in the international hit Titanic, which also played at Southwark Playhouse back in 2013, and subsequently transferred to Toronto just this year. James is also now an accomplished director, as he currently is represented in London with a small chamber version of the hit Broadway musical Bye Bye Birde. Now, this show has a wonderfully colorful history. It was produced on the back of the Elvis Presley hysteria that gripped America back in the 1950s. Presley was packed up and shipped off to serve in the United States Army back in 1958, and then producer Edward Pajula turned this temporary teen depression into a full-length musical. It had a book by Michael Stewart, and music and lyrics by Charles Strauss and Lee Adams, respectively. The story focuses on Conrad Birde, in place of Elvis, a rock and roll teen idol who was drafted into the United States Armed Forces, and as a last-ditch publicity stunt, the main character of Albert Peterson, who's Birde's manager, arranges for Conrad to bestow one last kiss to a random screaming fan from small-town Ohio. The ensuing press coverage and teen pandemonium of the town at the arrival of Birde is a fantastic and all-too-familiar reminder of the chaos that celebrity brings to us. Now, the score was very indicative of the traditional musical theater sound that was still prevalent on Broadway at the time, with its jazz, pop, plus the new advent of rock and roll also thrown in for good measure. Because of its innovations with the rock and roll sound, it is considered to be, by many Broadway historians, to be the first major musical theater piece to feature rock numbers, being the forerunner for the likes of Hair, Godspell, and The Who's Tommy. Now, the original Broadway production featured Dick Van Dyke, Paul Lynde, and Cheetah Rivera in the starring roles, with Dick Gautier in the title role. It then suffered a major motion picture in the 60s starring Anne Margaret, along with Dick Van Dyke and Paul Lynde reprising their Broadway roles. The film, it has to be said, is a poor representation of the stage production, with many deleted numbers, changes to story and plot lines, and completely unnecessary added scenes and characters. Dick Van Dyke and Paul Lynde both panned the film, stating that true Birde fans probably would never appreciate it. There was, however, in 1995, a straight-to-television adaptation of Bye Bye Birde, and that film starred Jason Alexander from the TV show Seinfeld in the Albert Peterson role, and that was alongside Vanessa Williams in the Cheetah Rivera role of Rosie Alvarez. And this film is much more faithful to the original piece and makes for a very charming, fun, although average quality film. Several Broadway veterans also appear in this version, including Mark Kudich as Conrad Birde and Tyne Daly as Mae Peterson, Albert's mother. Chynna Phillips, a former member of the female pop group Wilson Phillips, plays Kim McAfee, the lucky Birde fan who gets chosen for his eponymous one last kiss. And rounding out the cast is George Wendt, who famously portrayed Norm in the hit sitcom Cheers, and he played Kim's father, Harry McAfee. That's enough background for now, I think. Let's head straight to my chat with director James Hume, who will tell us more about the current production going on here in London. We are coming to you here live from the world-famous London Palladium, where I'm having the good fortune to talk with Mr. James Hume. James, welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here at the London Palladium. Couldn't be more showbiz.
Could not be more showbiz at all. We go back quite a few years here, don't we?
We do,
actually?
Yes. We were both working here, about 3-4 years ago? Not
something
longer.
like that.
Yeah. And we're back here again, so it's lovely
We always
to see
find
you.
our way home, don't we?
We do.
There's no place like home, as a matter of fact, because that was the
Thank
first thing
you.
we worked on here.
Oh, nice link. I like that. Yes, good.
And we're here talking about Bye Bye Birde,
Yes.
going on at Ye Olde Rose and Crown up in Walthamstow.
Yes.
But you have your finger in several pies here, as we say in the U.S. You have directorship under your belt. You have assistant director and performer as well, for good measure. And now, is this the first piece that you've directed here in London?
Yes, it is. Well, I say yes, it is. I have directed some reviews and some cabarets, and I've also been in something myself that I've directed as well.
Okay.
But this is the first fully fledged production that I've done, this first book musical, as we call it. So, yes, it was something I wanted to do for the last, I would say, year or so, was just get my teeth into a full show. And this opportunity came up, and I was just coming to an end of an acting job, and I just thought it just felt right to do it now and stretch that muscle, which I've been wanting to stretch for quite a while. So
that's great. Yeah, it looked like absolutely perfect timing because you were involved. Just to give you a bit more context for the listeners, you were involved a couple years ago with Titanic at Southwark Playhouse, and that was the gig you just finished in Toronto.
Right.
Is that right?
Yes.
So Titanic, Southwark Playhouse here in London had excellent reviews, had a wonderful following, so wonderful, in fact, that it has basically toured internationally, has it? So tell me about that piece a little bit.
Titanic is... Well, I don't think I should tell the story, because I think everyone will know what the story is.
But, right, exactly. Well, tell us more what your involvement with it was and how that went for you.
Well, it was my third job out of drama school. I'd been to see Tom Sutherland's and Danielle Torrento and Mark Aspinall's production of Mac and Mabel, which I loved, and I kind of was keeping up to date with what they're doing, and Titanic came up at a really good time. I just finished Quasimodo at the King's Head Theatre. It came up just after that, and I went in for it, and I was lucky enough to get the job. And what was amazing about that piece, and I think what part of its success was, is that we didn't know what we were in terms of we didn't know how successful it was going to be. We didn't know how amazing it was going to be. So we all, as an ensemble, and it was very much an ensemble piece, and again, that's one of the things that makes it work, is that we all pulled together as a company, and from day one, and to this day, we are all such close friends now.
Really?
And throughout the rehearsal process and throughout the show, we just bonded. And so when we got the chance to do it 2 years later in an amazing place like Toronto, although we did have some new people come into the company, which we welcomed with open arms, and within 2 days they were part of the family as well. It was amazing to get back that company feel so quickly. And to this day, we're all still great friends. We still message each other, and where others are in shows now, we keep supporting each other. And
that's great.
And it was just an amazing time, because we going into the show, when we opened it at Southwark, we didn't know what was going to happen. We don't really know with any show, but particularly with that show, it had been done on Broadway in a very kind of lavish, huge production, which did okay, and then it wasn't really done after that. And then we did it at Southwark, but we did it in a very scaled down version, in a chamber version, which turned a few heads. And it really worked, and it was an amazing thing to be a part of, and it was so lovely to have the chance to do it again, as a company, but also selfishly for us, because every single person had a great part in that show, and that was another thing. Every single person had just wonderful songs and wonderful scenes, and just a real gem of a job that those ones don't come up very often. So
right, exactly. Yes. And how did the North Americans treat you? I bet you did you well in Toronto.
We had an amazing time. They were so welcoming that it sold brilliantly. We were lucky enough to have Ben Heppner join the cast as Mr. Strauss. Who's I'm sure is a very acclaimed, world famous tenor, come into the show. So it was a very different world for him. He had just done kind of the opera world, so to come into the musical theatre world, he was a very good. He adapted very well to that.
And who was he playing in the piece?
He was Mr. Strauss, which are the older couple in the show, who have the beautiful duet Still at the end of the show. And so we had him join the cast, who was the only Canadian in the cast. But that, combined with the, I think, success of the Southwark, meant that the show sold really well. And we were in a house not dissimilar to the London Palladium in sort of attendance. We were kind of playing to 2,000 people every day. And it was an amazing thing to go from Southwark, which I think, correct me if I'm wrong, is about 200, 220 seats.
That sounds about right, yeah.
To something that's, 2,000. It was, and just to do it again and for it to be as successful was absolutely amazing, and something that I'll never ever forget doing. I don't usually gush about jobs, but that's certainly one that I do gush.
Well, it sounds absolutely incredible, so you have every right to gush, as it were. So you're an actor by trade, but you've also worn several different hats in this town. Basically, you also assistant directed for Mr. Luke Fredericks, who's a good friend of both of ours.
Yes, for Morphic Graffiti's production of Carousel,
which also did very well at the Arcola Theatre here in town.
It's a lovely show to work on. I mean, that piece is gold dust, so if you ever get an opportunity to work on that as an actor or a creative, I think you're in for a great time.
It's a beautiful piece.
Oh, yeah, we had a great time on that. The Arcola was lovely, the cast were great, working with Lee Proud and Andrew Corrigan and Luke and everyone involved with the piece was a really great time. And then also I joined Luke again, which he was nice enough to ask me back to assist him on his joint production with Paul Taylor Mills, Bat Boy at Southwark.
That's right, yeah.
Which is a very different show, but it was just as much fun to work on, because it was a very kind of interesting show to work on, a very, very crazy kind of story.
And couldn't be polar opposites from each other, really.
Yeah, Yeah, which is, as a creative, well, also as an actor, but particularly as a creative, it is great to really stimulate that kind of creative muscle.
Both pieces got rave reviews, and
Yeah.
you worked with Andrew Corcoran,
Yeah.
who has presented for this program
Oh,
before,
has he?
believe it or
Oh,
not. Yes, and of course
he's
I
great.
chatted with Luke about
Yeah.
Bad Boy for this very program, so it all completely goes full
All
circle all the
connects,
time,
yeah.
doesn't it?
Yeah. Small
But
world.
now you are working on, or you've just finished working on
Yeah.
Bye Bye Birdie. You have taken
Yeah.
the training wheels off that piece, and it is
Yes.
off and running off very well up in Walthamstow at Rose and Crown.
Yes.
So that's a brilliant, classic American piece. So you touched on this a little bit, but tell us a little bit more about how you got involved with the piece as director.
The piece as director. I worked for All Star Productions, who are the in-house production company at the Rose and Crown. I worked for them. It was my first job out of drama school. I was in She Loves Me.
That's right. Yeah.
Playing Kadai for them, which was great. And then I kept in touch with them over the next 2 or 3 years, and we had a couple of meetings about doing certain shows and getting working with them as a director.
Okay.
And I was in Toronto, and that sounds so showbiz to say that. I was in Toronto, and I got a phone call from Andrew there, the producer there,
Yes.
and said, look, they had the rights to Birde, and would I like to do it? So it's not a show that I was thinking of doing,
Okay.
which was interesting. It was a show that was brought to me, and he sent me the script and he sent me the score, and I only knew certain songs from it, kind of the classic Put on a Happy Face and
Right, exactly.
Honestly Sincere.
Quite a
and-
few popular songs.
yeah, a
from
lot of
that,
Living to
actually,
Do and Kids as well. It was a very famous
Oh, yeah.
number. So I knew those, but I didn't really know the story, or I didn't know the show and how it works. So whilst doing Titanic, I spent a week reading it over and over again and working on the score. And I just thought, actually, it's just a really, really good, fun piece. And I thought, what if there's anything that I want to do when I direct my first show, is I want to have a good time.
Yeah.
So,
And this piece is a good time.
Oh my
let's
god,
face it.
it's such a good time. And I just thought, and with a space and with a company like All Star and a lot of these companies in London, because of the style of venue and because of the style of company, you can really experiment with the piece and be a safe enough environment to do that. The reason I wanted to work on it is because, yes, it's a fun piece, but I also wanted to really deconstruct it and see, and almost get to the real heart of it.
Which you sort of have to for a space like that.
Yeah.
A space like the Rose and Crown, the Landor,
Yeah.
places like that. You
Edinburgh,
all have to.
Yeah.
You have to rethink it, and you have to
Yeah.
sort of start from scratch.
Exactly. You
in a
kind of
lot
have to
ways, which is great.
strip
which is
it back.
great.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to really find the heart of the piece.
Yes.
Personally, I think with pieces around the 40s, 50s, 60s, is that sometimes you can get kind of stuck behind the cuteness and the kitschiness
Right, yeah.
of these kind of shows, because they're such high energy and such fun and such big characters and things like that sometimes you can fall into the trap of almost going too pantomime with it, I think.
Right.
So I really wanted to make sure that, although yes, it's a very high energy show and it's good fun and it's a comedy, that there is a real person behind each of these characters,
Right.
and we see in their eyes their story and things like that. Which for a piece like that and a book like that was a real challenge in rehearsal. But I'm jumping ahead to rehearsal. But
That's good. And we'll talk about
Yeah.
what some of the problems that would be presented from that because it's a different time period, because it's very American.
Yep.
And so we will touch on that in just a little bit. But just in case our listeners have not had the pleasure of this piece, whether it's in the
Yep.
very bizarre feature film
Yes.
version
Yeah.
or any stage production,
Yes.
most of our listeners in America, I reckon, will know it
Yes.
very well. But for our British listeners in particular, what's it about? What's the bare bones of it?
It's a story it's loosely based on Elvis Presley drafting into the US Army during the late 50s. It follows the story of Conrad Birde, who is this Elvis type character,
Right.
And his manager Albert Peterson and his secretary Rosie Alvarez. It's kind of like a three-way story. The show starts at the beginning that we find out about Conrad's drafting into the army, which means that Albert is effectively going to lose his star.
Exactly, his meal ticket,
Yes,
as we would say.
so the show starts in quite a dramatic storyline. So Rosie comes up with a plan that Conrad can go to a town and kiss this unknown kind of fangirl.
Exactly, yeah.
And have a PR around that, and,
Yeah.
and hopefully keep him and make it all good again. So it's a really good fun story about the American life in the late 50s. And it's what's interesting about it is that it sits right on the cusp of the kind of post-war recovery,
Yes,
and the pre-60s free love, rock and roll era. It's right in the middle. So it was a real tense time in American history. It was really,
Absolutely.
it was a lot of things going on. It was right in the middle of civil rights and things like
Yes,
that.
it was.
So it was quite. although it was a fun time, it was quite tense as well.
So this does naturally bring us into our discussion of how did you handle the American side of things. You've already spoken pretty truthfully, I would say, about what that time period was like in American history. This takes place in a fictional small town in Ohio, but I just happen to come from a small town in Ohio.
Oh, gosh.
And I can speak from experience when I say things that my grandparents used to tell me that used to blow my mind was, here I am, an American who grew up in Springfield, Ohio, who now lives in London, England, and my grandfather used to say to me, it wasn't until I was a teenager that I took my first trip just north of Springfield, and then my dad would say, it wasn't until I was in my 50s that I took my first trip outside of the country, and it wasn't until a teenager until I took my first trip out of the state. So again, you sort of go back to people of my grandparents' generation who just very rarely, the hometown was their unit, and their daily life was the family, the school. And the church in a lot of ways for people, but that was it. Anytime there was anything exciting that happened, that was it. Everybody was there. If there was a parade in town everybody in town was there. If there was a football match for your school, we're talking about American football here, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Everybody was there to support. That was your life. Anything that you could have needed or was exciting in life all happened in the hometown at that time. So to springboard from that. It makes it a big deal for this town, like I said, this fictional town of Sweet Apple, Ohio, when they've decided to basically bring America's biggest star, Conrad Birde, to the town. And so tell us how you sort of went about approaching from the British standpoint, the British perspective of things. How did you go about bringing that reality to the stage?
What I wanted to really look at the difference between New York and Sweet Apple, and start with those, and start with really separating how Sweet Apple, before Conrad Birde comes into town, how that works as a real structured town. As you say, everyone goes about their business, all the kids, particularly the young, they go to church, they go to school, they do their thing. And although they might at home, in their bedrooms, kind of, kiss their posters and do all those things that we do as teenagers when we're in love with whoever, to express oneself was not allowed in that way. That way. And so, looking at the piece and using the songs, I just really wanted to see the physicality difference between these young teenagers when Conrad comes into the town, what that really does. And that's how I started, was looking at how these kids acted when he wasn't there, and when he comes in, how we can use as putting the show on, how we can use the dance numbers particularly and the singing to really emulate the difference.
And what were some of the differences that you ended up discovering as you rehearsed the piece?
Well, I wanted and I remember speaking to Anthony Whiteman, my brilliant choreographer. I said to him, I want the dance to really drive this piece, and really become the narrative almost, because it was what I wanted to focus on, was looking at in the numbers from the Telephone Hour song, which almost opens the show, which is in Sweet Apple. The difference between that and then when towards the end of the show, when Conrad comes in and he does what a lot of living to do.
Of course, brilliant. Yeah.
Looking at those two different numbers as the Telephone Hour, which is written very structured and very more in their body, and more personal to them.
Good way to
so
put
then
it,
when Living to Do comes along, and he kind of tells the kids about what they should be doing and how great life is if you follow what he wants to do, how expressive they can be, and we throw in lots of lifts and just get the youngsters to really just open up their bodies and really throw themselves around a bit, and just looking at those differences has been really good fun.
Right, exactly. Yeah. By the time Conrad sweeps into this town, he sort of brought New York and the celebrity sensibility to this small town. And I think we can draw obvious parallels with nowadays with our obsession with celebrity culture, but you have to imagine that in that day and age, like I said, there wasn't much excitement that one could draw from one's own personal life. I mean, my grandfather used to center his life around telling the story of when John F. Kennedy rolled into town to campaign. That was just something like that is something that people would talk about for years to come, whereas
now, because of YouTube and things like that, you can just
people are at our fingertips. But so to imagine somebody of the Elvis Presley stature to come into town and turn that upside down. So the picture that you're drawing here of sort of how the choreography and the piece itself sort of naturally moves towards, I don't want to say anarchic, but it does fall along that a bit, but chaotic, energetic, jubilant.
Yeah.
All these different emotions are coming out of these kids, which of course is then going to draw very specific reactions from the parents.
It kind of goes from Andy Warhol to Picasso. You know what I mean?
That's a gorgeous metaphor.
Do you like
Lovely.
That? That's what I was thinking. It's just that very bold towards the beginning, and then when he literally comes in, because the thing about Conrad is, though he is the title role, he actually doesn't do that much.
He doesn't really.
He has a lot of stage time, but he doesn't say much, which I think is a really interesting choice by Michael Stewart.
That's very true,
the book writer. And that's been really good fun to really experiment with that, and how this guy just comes in, and Zach Hamilton playing Conrad is lovely to look at for all the audience.
Which helps with that character.
Exactly. So when he, literally sweeps across the stage, he takes everyone with him. So the way the show is done now is exactly how I wanted it to be done, and I'm really, really pleased with how it's
very good.
Shaping up.
So let's talk about a few of the numbers that are in the show, because as you've said already, there's quite a few popular standards that came out of this. Certainly by the time I saw it, I was already familiar with Put on a Happy Face. Put on a Happy Face is just has become a standard in musical theater. You also had the song Kids, which I knew going into, which is a famous song for the adults to sing.
Honestly Sincere is quite a famous one, I've been told.
And what else had you heard of before?
That one, I seem to remember hearing A Lot of Living to Do, I heard a couple of times.
I think I knew
so
that
I know that one as well. But I mean, Put on a Happy Face, interestingly, I believe wasn't going to be in the show originally.
No kidding.
It was on the block to be taken out. So heaven forbid that we could have lived without that number in our lives. So it's great to see it be in the show, because it deserves to be there, and it's a great number. And again, what Anthony has done with that number in the choreography is beautiful. So I'm really pleased with all the songs in there. They're beautiful, and there's what I love about the show is that there's not too much music and there's not too little. I think there's a perfect amount.
I would agree with that.
To keep the show driving forward and to keep it on the front foot as I wanted it to be. We haven't, apart from one of the ballets, we haven't cut anything else. It's all in there.
Okay. Which ballet was that did you cut?
We decided to cut the 100 Ways to Kill Him ballet. We kept the Shriner ballet. We decided it was. And
that's something I think I asked because I don't think I've ever seen that in any of the versions I've seen.
No, it's very common to lose both of them actually, but we decided to keep one of them.
Okay.
And I'm very glad we did, because it is quite a talking point now.
Fair enough.
It's kind of a random piece of the show, but it's turned out to be quite a successful one, so that's good.
Fair enough. And so how the cast adapted to this piece and then these famous songs?
I've been so lucky as a director to have a cast that were so on board from day one.
Good.
I remember the first day where I discussed how I wanted to approach the piece, and we went through the set model, and I could tell that everyone was on board straight away, which as a director is it makes half my job a lot easier. So it was lovely. They've been great. We've got a lot of graduates, which is lovely.
Good.
We've got some stalwarts in there as well, which is lovely, and just as committed. And that's the thing, is that they've all been so committed from day one to this show, and the show, as I keep telling them every time I see them, the only way this show works is on their energy. You know, and every single time when I go and see the show now, and I try and see it twice a week, but once a week, whatever, is they're giving 100% every single time, and that is, I think, it's reflected in how well it's done with the press and with getting the lovely nominations that we've got, is because the cast are absolutely 100% committed to it.
And who are some of the lovely faces that we have in this show? You already mentioned the gentleman who plays Birde.
Yes, I'd love to mention them all. We've got the fabulous Liberty Buckland playing Rosie, who I've worked with before.
What a great name.
Yes, look out for her, she's going to be a star. We've got Ryan Ford Iesco, another great name. Been very lucky with names in this cast. Playing Albert. Jane Ashley playing Mae Peterson. She's wonderful. God, there's too many to mention. Abigail Matthews. We've got a great the parents of Kim McAfee, Stephanie Lisay and Harry Hart, who are, again, two names to watch out for, because they've been an absolute joy. And just as I say, I'd love to mention everyone, but
if it's a big ensemble piece, sometimes
exactly. But they've been an absolute joy, and I'm going to miss them a lot. I'm going to miss them a lot.
If you've not been mentioned a name, you are with us in spirit, folks.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I couldn't wish for a better cast, if I'm honest, with this piece. They've been absolutely brilliant.
Wonderful. Now, before we close today, James, first of all, thank you very much for being on the program. We sure appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And give us all the juicy details of how people can book tickets to see the show, when it's on till, where it's on, all that lovely stuff.
So, Bye Bye Birdie is running at the old Rose and Crown Theatre in Walthamstow. We run to the 4th of September, running from Tuesday to Sunday with a Sunday matinee at 3 o'clock. You can book tickets via the website at allstarproductions.co.uk. And you can also phone the theatre, and I don't have the phone number in my head right now, but if you Google the theatre,
it'll all be on the website.
It'll all be on the website, and it's selling really well. So if you want to come and see it, then get your tickets now, because it's going to be running out soon. So
all right, it's always good to be. It's always good to be running out of tickets.
Well, particularly in this time of year, because we were conscious with Edinburgh and everything else going on. We thought, where's our audience coming from? But people have really taken to it, and we're really pleased how it's
great. Worth a trip up on the Victoria line.
Absolutely. Well, half of it.
Half of it.
Yes. Please come on down and support, because they're a great cast, and they'll love you forever if you do.
All right. All the best to you, James. All the best in the future, and we'll hopefully chat again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. Lovely to speak to you.
Folks, go ahead and head to www.allstarproductions.co.uk for all of your ticketing information and info about the show itself. Head on down to the Rose and Crown and see it while you still can. It closes on September 4th, this coming Friday, and the company is frequently announcing sold-out performances on their social media platforms, so get your tickets now. Speaking of social media, segue, do pop along to our Twitter page, which is @MusicalTalk, and give us a like on Facebook, for good measure, while you're at it. Also, yours truly has finally started his own Twitter page, so please give me a follow at DavidHerzog06 and partake of all of my charming life foibles and quips. Finally, musical talkers, before we part ways and head off into the musical theater sunset for the week, I have just one more plug. Now, this is more for our New York City and Greater New York listeners. British and other international listeners can feel free to please cover their ears at this time. My good friend and fellow performer from She Loves Me is having her premiere concert at 54 Below, the famous New York City cabaret venue for musical theater performers. It's none other than Ms. Charlotte Giaconelli, an accomplished actress and singer in her own right. I'm very proud of her and know that you will enjoy her evening of song. Charlotte is performing Saturday, September the 5th at 7 p.m., Go along to 54below.com. That's the actual numbers, 54. 54below.com, and you'll get all the details there. 54 Below is located on West 54th Street, right around the corner from Carnegie Hall. Give New York some hell, Miss Giaconelli, and break a leg. Thanks again for listening, folks, and we will see you at the theater. Goodbye.